Oh my God, people. Well, I guess, right? 8 minutes, we can start. These people, these lazy ass people, better come on time, right? So, not lazy, poor things. The world is insane. There are people that arrive late are not necessarily lazy, okay? People watching this recording, I was just being whatever. So today, people, is a meeting that is so important to me because, like, if I could, I would have started with autonomy. I was just figuring out the order in which I should have, created this course. And then the other things, they made sense to come first. But in reality, I feel like autonomy is the backbone, is the structure of my whole practice, not just autonomy for the student, but autonomy for me too, right? I noticed that here in Brazil, we use the word autonomy more, but in other countries, sometimes we use the words student agency instead of autonomy, student autonomy, right? So I just wanted to start off this meeting with a little quote from, the guy, Paulo Freire, right? As always. And then I want to hear what you guys think and feel and what you experience about autonomy. Okay. So here is the quote. Oh, this one is beautiful. The oppressed, having internalized the image of oppression, are fearful of freedom. Freedom would require them to eject this image and replace it with autonomy. This is seldom a willing or an easy task. So this quote, it goes straight to the point to me, because we have students that they say, oh, I've never learned English, or I've studied in this school and I didn't learn English, and I did this and I didn't learn English, and oh my God, I'm not evolving, oh my God. But then people, they don't have the ability, they don't have the knowledge to really make it happen, right? That's the reality. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the background, they don't have the experience in autonomy to be able to be autonomous, because the system makes them internalize the image of them being, oh no, I need to do the homework, or I hate grammar because grammar is horrible, grammar is complicated, or because, English is not for me. They internalize these ideas that make them think they're not capable of things. And then we have a long road to convince them otherwise, but it's impossible to do so if we don't give them autonomy, right? Because if we spoon feed the kids, then they don't learn how to eat for themselves, right? So I want to know from you guys how you've been feeling about autonomy and your students. If this is something that works, if this is something that doesn't work. And then along the way, we'll be talking about like the different strategies we can have to build more autonomy. So who wants to go first? Yes, Rebecca.
Yes, I think I'm trying to figure this out because basically the way I was taught, I was spoon fed. So I don't really know how to do it because I have no experience from my teachers, from my professors at university. So I'm trying to figure this out. And I think my first step is by talking to my students, and the way that you always do, like that you always say, asking questions like, what do you think about this? So how can you do that? How are you planning to study this? What do you have in mind about this new vocabulary? Are you going to use this week? Are you going to, I don't know, make sentences? So I'm trying to always ask questions, listen to my students, but I don't really see the results still. Like, I think I need more time, maybe, I don't know. I don't really see the results coming, but I do believe in that. I think some this is the approach, but I'm still trying to figure this out. The way that I can do it, the way that I can manage, and I don't know. I don't know. I think I need to listen more and think more about it.
Absolutely. I get that. And I really thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it so much because that's the reality. Like, right? We have this idea, we know that it's important, but then how do we effectively implement that? And I think that's the biggest thing. But I do want to ask you before I go further and talk about what you said, or give the word to anyone else. I want to know, what are the results that you don't see? What are the results you wish you had and you're not seeing?
I don't really see my students exposing themselves to English after our classes. I don't really see this work. I see people paying classes and expecting this 1 hour in a week to be everything. And this
Well,
is impossible. And I tell them this is impossible since day one.
you
And
tell
so
them, you
before
make
day
that
one.
very clear.
Yes, before day one, because we have a conversation. So, and I try. I'm always very honest, really, because I think it's not fair to say like, oh, 1 hour it's enough. That's not fair to say that. It's not true. It's a lie. So the result is I have this expectation of seeing my students exposing themselves to English after my classes, and I don't really see this happening. So this is not a reality right now. Of course, I do have exceptions, but I would say like 75% of my students don't do it. So that's not a good number in my opinion. So
Oh, it's not, but that 25% is bigger than mine. Mine is maybe a little bit less sometimes. Some days, some months, people are very motivated. But I
yes,
think that you touched on a word that is really important here. It's expectation,
yes,
right? Expectation is such a fucking important word in this scenario, because English is our life, legit. Like, it is our job. It is what we think about all the time. Some of us, right? Maybe, but like, it's not our life per se in the sense of it's everything to us, but it is permeated in our existence. We're thinking about it. We're reflecting on how to be better. We're having contact with it. We're doing all these things to put English in our daily life. And then we expect our students to have that same initiative because they're paying us, right? So it's like, oh, they're paying us to do this. So they must be interested, but sometimes they're not that interested because they have this internalized idea that they need to be passive, because they don't really have time for it. And I understand them not having time for it because they live in a capitalist society, and maybe they didn't even want to learn English. Maybe they wanted to learn Spanish, maybe they wanted to learn crochet, maybe they wanted to learn whatever, but they need to fucking learn English to survive in this society. So it's like, I kind of get my students for not studying, but I do think they need to be held accountable for their part in the learning journey. And accountability is so important because a student needs to know from day one, like you're already saying, that, hey, you need to pull your weight, right? You need to do your part, because I'm not a miracle worker. I always say that one class a week is enough if you are having contact with English all the other days, right? But if you had class every day of the week and still didn't have contact with English out of classes, it wouldn't be enough either. So, to be honest, like, it has to be a part of your life. Because most of the teachers I know, they are self taught. Most of the teachers I know, they learn English on their own. So, nobody made a study plan for them. Nobody, gave them homework per se, but they did things after themselves. So, you know, we can't expect students to be as engaged in learning as we are, but we do have to tell them, hey, this is not going to happen if you don't. But I do believe that there is a tool that I call metacognition, and well, I call metacognition, no, the whole scientific community calls it metacognition, right? But it's used as a tool to implement autonomy in an efficient way. Right. So metacognition is the science of thinking about thinking, of thinking about learning. And then it has a fancy schmancy name, but in reality, it's just questions that we use to incentivize people to have autonomy. So we have the prompts, right? Examples or prompts are: what do you want to learn? How long do you want to learn it in? What are your learning goals? What are the strategies you've been trying? What are the ones that have been more effective? What is the one that gives you most pleasure? How do you think you can implement bilingual habits in your day to day? So it's like reflection questions. And I don't ask all these questions at once, but when I see that I have 5 minutes until the end of class, I'm like, so let me ask you a little question here. Instead of shoving a warm up down their throat or a game or a puzzle or whatever the fuck we feel like we need to do in the last 5 minutes or feedback, because I hate giving feedback at the end of sessions, but that's another topic. But I just ask them a real metacognitive question about, like, you know, what's up? Because then that is the accountability. That is how I hold my students accountable. Because if almost every fucking class, let's say every 2, 3 classes, I am there asking them a metacognitive question. And then they're going to be like, okay, my teacher's going to ask me. So maybe I need to, because then maybe I ask them once, I ask them twice, and then I ask them the third time. And then they won't, I want to believe that they won't have the same answer. Like, oh, I'm not doing anything. But I ask them the question differently every time, right? So, what do you feel like is a goal you want to learn? A goal you have with your English? What is something you would love to do with your English? Okay, and how do you think we could get there? You know, instead of telling them what I think they should do, oh, you should do this. I ask them, what do you think we could do to get there? Okay, blah blah blah. We have that conversation. Bye bye. 2 classes later. So, what are some little moments in your day where you have contact with English? And then they tell me, oh, teacher, tá go flex, tá foda, wow, não tô tendo tempo pra nada. And then I'm like, oh, but let's see. What are you doing while you're pooping? And then they're like, oh, I'm seeing memes. Teacher. Oh, you, what do you think you could do in that time? Do you think you could follow some content creators in English? And then we're like finding little ways at the end of every class or every 2, 3 classes where we're reflecting on autonomy, where we're reflecting on their accountability, because that needs to be something that we're there with them all the time. And in groups, it works really well too, because one person is hearing the other telling them about what they should do. So it's kind of like, I don't want to pagar mico in front of the other people. So I got to hold my end of the bargain up. Right. So I love metacognitive questions. I put them at the end of every class that I feel like there is a little gap, and that normally makes people kind of start thinking, make their wheels kind of turn because they don't know how to do things. And those questions help guide them a little. Does that make sense? Nice. Paula, what do you have to say, love? Tell me.
Well, I've been changing a little bit. I mean, not a little bit, a lot since I started the mentorship. And actually, a little bit before it, I was changing, trying to find a way how help my students to be autonomous in their studies. And because I don't know, I'm not very organized, so I never could really create a study plan, this kind of stuff, because I used to start it trying to be organized and help my students, but they weren't engaging, they weren't using it really. So then I thought, oh, okay, I'm not gonna waste my time because they're not using it, they're not really following the study plan, they're not using their you know then now there are some students coming to me and asking me to help them. So I don't know what to do, because that's actually a question that would live here. How can I help them in this autonomy stuff and not being or actually not showing a image that I would be a lazy teacher, like I want to help them in autonomy, not giving them everything, not spoon feeding them, but how can I not look like a lazy teacher that is not really caring about them and not preparing study plans, all this stuff they ask me to.
Oh, I love that question. I really do, because I think you touched on a word that we always feel, that we are lazy. We feel like we're lazy if we don't do these things, right? That is the way the system has been, established, where it's like, okay, the great teachers, they gave me a book. They give me the exercise. They give me the study plan. They give me the everything. I just gotta come in and that's it. I just gotta pay. Fuck No, right? You know what I'd say to my students sometimes when they can't come to me and say, "Oh, teacher, I want a study plan." I'm like, "I love you too damn much to give you a study plan, to be honest." Because I'm not that kind of nutritionist that gives diets. I'm the one that does the whole diet re-education, honey. So if you want to do this, okay, let's do this. Let's do this now. Get a little piece of paper, open a Google Doc now. Let's put this shit together. And then I'm asking them, so how often do you think you have time for English in your routine? And then they're like, okay, maybe every day 15 minutes. Okay, so write down there. Monday, 15 minutes. Pa, 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 pa. Write every day of the week there. So what do you think your routine on Monday is like? No, 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 I do this, this, and that, teacher. Where do you see there's a little gap where you could be putting English, you know? Because, you know, it doesn't need to be like, oh, you're studying, you're doing exercise. It could be just listening to English or watching something. When can you? And then they tell me, and they're like, okay, so do you think you could do this, this, and that? Yeah, teacher, good idea. And then I'm like, write it. Are you writing that shit down? Okay, write it down. And I make them write everything and I make them think of everything. I'm just asking them questions. And there's no way I'm being lazy because I'm having the trouble of asking them all those questions. If you know, if that were something of a lazy person, then why don't they think of the fucking questions? Right? Because let's be really honest. Chat GPT makes study plans. If you go on ChatGPT and you're like, okay, can you give me a 15-day study plan to learn English? ChatGPT will do it. So they don't really want a study plan. They don't really want a study plan because the person that wants a study plan doesn't ask for a study plan. They just go and they learn shit and they look for things online and they can Google. If you literally Google study plan for basic English, you will find a study plan, people. Like, come on. I think that if you go on Instagram and you put hashtag study plan or free study plan, you will find many teachers with free study plans in their bios. So nobody that asks for a study plan really wants a study plan. They just want to feel like sometimes they want to feel like they're doing something, but in reality, they're not learning independence, right? So don't feel lazy. Talk to them about the philosophy of why you will not make a study plan for them. Because it's important to establish the philosophy, to have that theory on point. Use that Paulo Freire shit. Use that bell hooks shit. Use that Piaget shit and talk about them and be like, no, honey, I can't make a study plan because that's going to be something dead for you. There's no way that I can think of what just works in your life without asking you. So let's do this together. Because I want you to be studying English for the rest of your life alone, not just with me, because you're not going to have classes with me forever. And I don't expect you to. Right. And I think they will value you for your honesty because you're not just giving them a solution that's ready. You're taking the time to see them, to ask them about their real routine. Does that make sense, Paul?
Yeah, yeah, totally. May I ask another question, please?
Sure.
Because I remember a chemistry teacher I had when I was in the last year of high school. She did well, how can I explain? Well, that's it. She used to tell us the subject, the topic we would be studying the next class. So then every student needed to make a research, write it down, and bring it to class. Like everybody needed to do that because if you do everything, all of the research, you would receive the points, at the end of the unity. So I tried to do it once. I tried to not be just throwing grammar in the classes and all the rules. And I asked my students to study, for example, study the present simple, and then next class we're gonna have a conversation about it. So bring your questions, doubts you have about this topic, and then we're gonna have a conversation. But that didn't really happen, because all the students are always busy and teacher, a lot of work, I'm so tired, I forgot, blah blah blah. So do you think that is interesting to ask them in advance to search for the topic we will be discussing next class and expecting them to bring it to class so then we could have a moment which is much better than only me speaking and telling them the rules?
That's the concept called the flipped a flipped classroom. There are books on that. There are a lot of articles on the flipped classroom. A flipped classroom is highly effective when the students actually flip the fucking classroom, which is not what usually happens. But I would say that if you ask them to research present, past, future, grammar, like, no, they wouldn't. I imagine they wouldn't. Like, I am a teacher. I am graduated in linguistics, but I would not do that. I think I wouldn't because it's just really boring. Maybe it's a little bit different, but even so, not so much. If you, for example, give them a video, like sometimes I have this group on Thursday, they're beginners. So when I'm going to show them a video in class that I feel like could be a little harder, I send them the video before, right? Like, and at the end of this class, because I'm going to do it next class, something like that. But not all of them watch it. Some of them do, some of them don't, you know. But I think that when you send them a video or an article, I think it's more probable that they will get into it than just saying research XY topic and then bring it into class, you know. So maybe give them something specific, but even so, there's not a guarantee that they will do that. You can try, right? But with the busy life that people live, it's complicated. Though that is a really great tool. Honestly, it's really nice when students come to class and they're ready and they did the research before or they read things before, they watched videos before, but talking about the real scenario, I just really don't see it happening often, you know?
Yeah, great. But thank you.
Yeah, I love the flipped classroom, but I think it works best in scenarios where there's grades because then this teacher has to like demand
Yeah.
a flipped classroom, right? It's
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, when I teach it at the school, I used to use this method, and with bigger groups, not every. I mean, they don't need to do. I mean, if just two or three of them do the research, it's great for us to speak to the other students. I don't know. It depends on how you ask them to do this. I don't like classwork, I mean, grading, this kind of stuff. But sometimes in a group of five, if two does the research, you can ask them, so tell me, what did you watch? What did you research? And they start introducing the topic to the classroom. I don't know, sometimes it's difficult because I think students not they're never going to do everything we ask them. We always ask things. It's plus. I mean, uh, even especially with English, it's plus plus, and we have to think that sometimes they do, but we have to prepare our class thinking that they could not do as well. I don't know.
yeah, we can't count. Não dá para contar com ovo no cu da galinha, right? We really can't put all our eggs in that basket of like thinking that, oh, they're going to be ready because maybe they won't, but maybe they will. And sometimes we're pleasantly surprised. So that's really cool. But I like sometimes stimulating the discussion before, maybe instead of sending them a video, stimulating a discussion. So, hey, next class, we're going to talk about this, this, and that. So, think about it. Start, you know, start reflecting. These days I had a class where we were talking about dreams or something like that. And then I asked them, hey, we're going to talk about dreams next class. Oh, we were talking about sleep. So next class, we're going to talk about dreams. So try to think of some dreams you've had. Try to research the vocabulary of the dreams that you know, so that you would need to tell me about the dream. And some of them actually did it. Some of them didn't, but some did. Some of them said, oh, teacher, I made a list of all the craziest dreams that I remember I had. And then they wrote things down. And the others were just like, oh, I had no time, teacher. So it really depends. Like Louisa said, some people are like awesome and they're really involved. But then again, you have to hold them accountable also, right? And tell them, like, hey, this would be really good because this is why I'm asking you to do this before. But I wouldn't make it grammar oriented again because that just sucks. I would make it topic oriented. Anyone else have any comments or questions about autonomy? No? Okay, Rebecca.
Yes, there is something that I was thinking. You talked about this in one of our meetings or on your Instagram. I really don't remember. And it's something that I really enjoy right now, to respect the student's moment and the student's feelings in that day. So sometimes you're planning something to the class, but then your student wants to talk about something completely different. And you go like, okay, it's amazing to talk about this. And it works 100%. So today, for example, I was planning to talk to my student about traveling. And the first second of the class, she was like, I need to talk about my weekend. I was okay, of course. I want to listen about your weekend. So the class was completely different from anything that I was expecting. But the class was amazing. So of course we need to plan. And as you always say, like, we need a plan A, B, C, D, E, whatever. We need options, but right now I really enjoy this natural thing. Like, let me see my student's mood. Let me see what is going on in his mind, so I can kind of manage the class. So this is something that I'm feeling, I don't know, a good vibe in my class. Yes.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love listening to that. And you
Yeah.
touched on something so important because that is one of the backbones of student agency and autonomy. I think it's very hard to have a class where a student is going to feel autonomous if from the minute they arrive in the class, they're being micromanaged. They're being told, okay, now it's time for a warm up. Okay, now it's time to play a game. Okay, now do this. Okay, now do that. Now repeat this. Now do that. There's no autonomy in the class flow itself. There's no agency. The student doesn't have the center of the class to themselves, right? So when you give them that option to talk about their weekend, when you let them unpack their existence and talk about what truly is important to them in that moment in their head, instead of what you had planned, that is giving your student autonomy, and that empowers them in the process too, because they stop thinking that education is whatever comes from my teacher. It's education is what I'm living and what my life being told to my teacher is, that, like, that's education. When I tell my teacher about my life, when she asks me questions, when I reflect on my existence, then that is education too. So I think that's amazing, and that's what we should all absolutely do if we want to have autonomous students, is give them that space. Very nice. Anyone else before I jump into metacognition, like, for sure? Okay, nobody? So let's talk a little bit more about metacognition, right? I brushed up on about it. And I think that when you're talking about autonomy, you got to talk about metacognition. So, well, if you're going to, metacognition is about learning proactively, right? It's about having protagonism and doing things for yourself. And it's something that can be used in all aspects of learning. You can't use it just for learning English. You can use it to learn anything you want in your life. I even have posted my personal profile that I shared in my story these days, like 8 powerful questions if you want to learn something new, right? So there are these questions that you ask that the student should ask themselves if they want to learn stuff, and in that they're just thinking about thinking, because honestly people don't do that a lot, right? Socrates, he has this phrase that says, I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. So, that brings up a new thing when we say, oh, I'm going to teach them grammar, I'm going to teach them content, I'm going to teach them stuff. And then we come from it, like, we come from another angle when we provoke them to use grammar instead of giving them the grammar, instead of passing the knowledge, passing the stuff, right? So a big part of metacognition is doing that, is letting them learn proactively and incentivizing them to think. And it's also about scaffolding a lot, like that thing of, like, the person is going and you're taking care of them, and you're taking care of them along the way, but you're not necessarily leading them by the front. You're just, there taking care in case they're going to fall or something like that, or guiding them in the right way. So some things that we want to do when we're, studying metacognition. Let me share my screen so y'all can see this. Boom, 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 boom. When we are talking about metacognition, we can model them to set specific learning goals. And I think modeling specific learning goals, I think is really important because the student needs to know what they want to do with their English, right? Oh, I want to speak English, but for what? Right? In what situations are you going to use your English? Like, in what environments are you going to use that? What type of vocabulary do you need to use? Because maybe the student is a lawyer, so they know that they're going to have to study something that's specific to law, right? If they are, I don't know, engineers, they're going to have to study engineering vocabulary. So they need to know what they want to do. They help monitor understanding too. It's really important for students to monitor what they understood out of what came in class. So if you talked to them about present, past, future, this looks like, did you understand this? Do you think you understood this well? Was this tricky for your brain? I have a teacher that works with me. We're modeling a course together, and she said, how much did your brain sweat? She asked her students, and she had this little graph with the brain very tired and the brain very strong. She's like, how much did your brain sweat during this lesson? And I think that's a really cool question to ask people, at the end of a lesson, to check if they really understood. Because maybe you say, entendeu? Everybody's like, yeah, yeah. That's a very general question, right? But then you say, how much did you have to work your brain? How much did it sweat to actually get this? I think that's a really cool point to come from. They reflect on their learning process. They think about, what am I doing? How am I doing? Because they need to do that. If you don't, then it's just, I come to my class and I expect my teacher to tell me everything. And that's not how it's going to go. And we also talk Uza a variety of techniques. Do you see my bilingualism there, people? It uses a variety of techniques. So metacognition is about thinking of those techniques and how those techniques work or not, because maybe a person loves to read, maybe a person hates to do it, right? So each strategy is going to be different. And it's about finding a rhythm too, because if we make a study plan, there are like 5 activities. There's a certain amount of activities. We don't know if that works in the person's rhythm or not. So there's really no way to pre-make that, right? And you need to know when to take a break. You need to review things regularly. And these are the metacognitive prompts, okay? I can send these in the group later, a complete list of the questions, but some questions that are cool to ask. First of all, what are you trying to learn, right? I already talked about that before. What are you trying to learn? What's the vocabulary? What do you really want to do with your English? How are you going to do it? Right? How are you going to do it? Are you going to watch stuff? Are you going to listen to stuff? Are you going to read stuff? What have you done until now that works? What's working for you? Because maybe they're doing things and they hate it, right? I've told students, oh, maybe you could listen to some podcasts in English. And then they start listening to the podcast and they're like, teacher, oh my God, every time I listen to a podcast, I feel like a piece of shit. So do you think that strategy is working for you? Do you think you're going to learn well with that? Do you think that's something you're going to do for a long time? That's something you're willing to do forever? So let's think of something else. What hasn't been working, right? What do you need to practice and review more? This one is very important, right? This is kind of like, o que você acha que você precisa melhorar? Which is a very stupid question because, like, who knows what they need to necessarily improve? But maybe a person knows what they need to practice, where they're feeling insecure, the things that make them feel not so safe in their English, right? So that's a good question to ask. And these are questions, people, that our students could be literally writing the answers to, so that they can really reflect. And also, how will you know when you've achieved your language learning goals? Because I think this one is so important. Sometimes students, they are speaking English well. I have students that they speak English pretty well, but still they don't think they're there yet. So we need to establish, hey, so when are you going to consider yourself a good English speaker? Is it when I have a meeting with my boss and I'm confident? Is it when I can pass the TOEFL or an immigration interview? Is it when I pass a job interview? Like, how are you going to know when you've gotten there? So these are basic things, people. We have more that we can work on, but these are very basic things that we can ask our students just to get them thinking about thinking and thinking about studying. What are your impressions so far? What do you think? Do you think this is doable? Yes.
Yes, yes, this is doable, and of course, 100%. But I have a question. On you earlier, you said that usually you ask those questions at by the end of the class, like the last 5 minutes. Do you also do that with the beginners? Do you do that in English, in Portuguese? How do you do that?
In with beginners, I do it in Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I'm not gonna do it in English because they can't think about thinking in a language they can't think yet.
Mm-hmm.
So they it's not so automatic for them in English yet to come out. So I think that it's better. I'm just like, e aí, gente, já que tem tempinho, e aí, o que que vocês acham? E tal, 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 tal. I ask the question in Portuguese because I want them to really think about what it is. I don't want them to be thinking about the English part of it, unless it's an advanced student, and then I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know.
Yes, you also said that you don't have many students really on keeping the contact with English after the classes, right? Um, but when you see the result, how does this result show up in the class? Like, do you see like the progress of your student class by class? Do you see like, do they ask you more questions? How do you see this progress? Like, I see this student is working hard after the class. Like, how
Mm.
do you measure this?
Well, I don't measure their progress to start off about how much they're having contact before the class. That's not one of my metrics to my success because it needs to be something palpable that I have control over, or that I can really assess. And since they're not doing it, like, my thing is that especially with intermediate and advanced students, I have a class log and a notebook where I write down the mistakes they've made. Right. And I put a little space for us to make the corrections afterwards together. But in general, I keep track of how many mistakes I'm writing down. And if I see, for example, that there's a lot of have instead of there to be, I focus on that. If I see there's a lot of mistakes with S in the third person, I focus on that. And then I see if those mistakes are diminishing over time. I also like to qualify things through the clarity of how much my student can speak, how much my student is comfortable in class. Because the thing is that if a student decides to just have classes with me and to not have contact with English in their life, they will evolve very slowly, but they will evolve. They will evolve, right? They'll learn some things. They'll. So I see students that they honestly don't have time, and they tell me, "Teacher, I honestly don't have time." But even and then this is what kills me. Even though I don't put in the effort, I see that I'm having results. So so you know. But others are like, "Ay, teacher, não tô vendo resultado, blah, 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 blah." And then I'm like, okay, so let's think about how we can make those results happen for you, right? Because I don't work miracles and all that. But ultimately, people know that they're not putting in the hard work because I'm always asking the questions. I'm always asking these questions. So they know that they're not doing shit and they're real about things. And that's something that's really important too. Like them being real to themselves and own up to your shit. Own up to the fact that you don't have time, that you don't want to have time. It's like own up to the fact that this 1 hour per week is what you have, is as much mental time you have to learn English as you possibly can accommodate in your life. And honestly, like, for example, I teach mothers after here, a lot of single moms, single black moms. Do you think they have a lot of time to think about English in their daily life? And I don't want our colonizers to have so much space in their heads anyway sometimes. So yes, it would be awesome if they had a lot of contact with English, but I'm not going to obligate a person to have contact with English. Of course, it could be beyond colonization. Of course, they could be seeing, I don't know, things from African and English speaking countries. They could be seeing things, they could be accessing the world. But honestly, I know that there are more important things in their lives than English in this moment. So I just accept the fact that maybe I'm it. Maybe this is the time they have and I'm going to accept it. So like I really am very open and honest about things, and I expect my students to understand they're part of the bargain, but it's just it is how it is. So progress exists, but it's not at the speed that they would like it to be. And I even joke, I'm like, if you want to pay me forever, that's okay. It's not. I'm not going to have them as students forever. But as long as they are paying me well, and that's another thing. That is another thing. It is one thing to be to have a student that doesn't give a shit and they're paying you 50 has 70 has per hour. It's another thing to have a student that doesn't give a shit and pays you 185. Honestly, if my students don't give a shit, okay, you use 185 reais per week. I don't care, like whatever, And they own it. Like these lawyers, it's nothing for them. The rich people, it's like nothing for them. It's like a pizza on the weekend. So, you know, a pizza on the weekend, it's nothing. They just not gonna do shit, and that's okay. And that's why it's nice when we are able to charge more, in a group setting too. In a group setting, the student is paying, I know, 200, 250, and then each one of them. So you're getting paid 250 per hour if you have a group with 4 people. So if you're getting paid 250 per hour, I don't know, perspectives change. Or am I being too capitalist here? No?
It's okay. I think that's the right way to think. Yes, and you said something that I've been thinking about. Like, I don't want my students to be dependent on me. And sometimes they tell me that, like, I can talk to you, but I don't feel comfortable to talk to anyone else. Feel very comfortable to talk to you. I feel very comfortable to express myself with you, but I don't feel the same when I try to talk to someone else, or when I try to expose myself to different situations. And I think this is also about autonomy. So they need to understand that they don't need me to speak English. I'm just like a guy, someone who is gonna help them. So this is what I want to get to this point where this is very clear first in my mind, and then it's gonna be very clear to my students as well.
Absolutely. It has to be crystal clear. It has to be like the number one thing that we know is that they need autonomy and we need autonomy, because that's it, right? It's in the end of the day, it needs to be cemented, or else we're gonna waver. We're gonna give in, right? So yeah, it's a journey. Not linear, but it's a journey, right? Ups and downs. Louisa, you were gonna open your microphone?
No, I was just thinking about how we can never. I mean, sometimes as teachers that we are like political teachers. I don't know how to say it. Sometimes people just want to take English classes and that's it. I mean, that's okay for them, just to, I mean, once or twice a week they have to, for, I mean, they have their reasons, but some people doesn't want to decolonize themselves or change the world. And as Ben said, as long as they're paying us, that's okay. I mean, I'm thinking because I teach rich kids at Higienópolis in São Paulo, and I used to go at their houses, their fancy houses, and some kids they're like, they didn't want anything. They didn't like studying. It was boring for me. I didn't even do like plans. But they were paying me. I was like every day going there and earning a lot of money, and that was it. What could I do? Sometimes I felt like I was failing with some kids when they don't. I mean, when they don't get the thread with us, and we're like, what am I doing? the parents wanted me to be there, and that's what was happening. It was a contract, and I could do anything. I couldn't do anything more than I was already doing, and
Yeah. We're not going to change the world. That's the thing that I love that. That is exactly. We're not going to change the world. Not everyone wants to decolonize themselves. You could even tell them, "Hey, you need autonomy, blah blah blah, Paulo Freire, blah blah blah. The system makes you passive, blah blah blah. They don't care. I'm a passive ass motherfucker and I'm going to stay like that." And then they're going to stay like that. There's just nothing you have to do about it. Like I've had those Higienopolis kids. We used to go, I used to play FIFA with them. We were playing FIFA, and then I used to make them like explain the game to me, everything. I used to like play dumb. So what are you doing now? How to get more points? What happens if you die? Blah, 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 blah. And they're speaking English and they're playing FIFA and they're Roblox and Fortnite and whatever. So, student-led learning meets autonomy, meets bilingualism, meets metacognition. It's a whole big mass of like letting the person have space to be what they want to be and not expecting them to be anything different. Of course, we can inspire, we can provoke, we can bring real and honest discussions about autonomy, but ultimately, some people, they really don't care. And we just gotta accept that, because I feel like we're taught to be like, I need to engage, I need to be like the clown, I need to wear a wig or do something, I need to be super funny, I need to have engaging classes. And I get pissed off whenever people are like talking about gamification, because honestly, I hate gamification. I think gamification nah, because people do not need to learn just because of games. Like, oh, I'm gonna learn English through a game about English. So I'm gonna have a game about English to learn English. No, play fucking FIFA, play Roblox, whatever. Like, people don't need to be like dogs training, because like life education is not preparation for life, it's life itself. So the act of playing a real game, the act of having a real conversation, that is right, that is learning. So there's no like ruler that we have. It's like, no, I need to do this or else I'm a bad teacher. We have to see what person we're teaching, because a good teacher for one person is a bad teacher for another. So it's really about personalizing the experience in that sense, right? I feel like the topics are so interconnected that at a certain point I start repeating myself. So I'm always like, did I say this before or not? Because I feel like the message is so consistent in the sense of give your students space and plan less and control less, that things will just fall into place. And some people like to be guided too. They're lazy of thinking, and that's it. Exactly. Some people like to be guided, but I normally say to these people, fuck, I will not guide you. Or I will not do it all the way. You will have to do some part. But then if they don't do their part, then I'm like, okay, just whatever. I have a student that I talk so much about autonomy with her. She was always like, can you give me some exercises, Bea? I'm like, Leticia, I know you're not going to do the exercises. Don't you want something more dynamic? And then we would talk in class about ways that could be more dynamic to study English. And then she would never come to class. She would miss classes, blah, blah, blah. She would show up late. And then every 2 months, she was like, Bea, can you give me some exercise? When she was rescheduling class, Bea, eu não vou conseguir ir pra aula hoje, mas você me manda uns exercícios. Eu vou tomar no seu cu, né? Manda os exercícios, sim, claro. And then I sent the exercises that, those websites where you do the exercise and the exercise corrects itself. Go crazy, vai lá no Perfect English Grammar, é o nome do site, né? Go crazy. The AI can correct you, because I'm not gonna spend my time, right? But I'm not gonna give you any exercise for me to correct. Fuck no, because that comes out of my teaching time. Any other questions, my people? Any other experiences with autonomy, problems with autonomy, solutions with autonomy? Does anyone have a success story? Does anyone have a success story of like a student that was autonomous and learned on their own? Ooh.
Just one student. Yes, and she's traveling to Canada next week. I'm very, very happy for her. Yes, such a good
Oh.
student. Yeah, she's also my friend.
And what was it like? Like, did she do everything on her own? And
yes, she was like exposing herself to English as much as possible. And it was kind of, I was sharing things with her, like, hey, I was watching this video, I think that's nice, take a look. And she watched the video, and then we talked about during the class, oh, I was reading that, I think that's very interesting. And she was reading the text, and we had like a very nice conversation during the class. It was over a year of classes. Yeah, sure, over a year, almost 2 years together. Oh my god, almost two
Oh.
years together. Yes, yes. So it was a very nice process, because it was very easy, very natural. Like, oh, teacher, if you watch something interesting, can you share with me? Because sometimes I don't really know what is interesting to watch. Yes, of course, I can share with you. And then I shared the video, and she was like, oh, I watched the video, and then I watched another one. I was,
Mm.
oh, that's so nice. Yes, yes. Such a nice student, such a nice person as well. But it was interesting to see her relationship with English changing over the months, Just see like, oh, I see on how interesting it is to keep this contact with English. Um, Once she told me that in English we have more content. So now first I look for the content in English, and then I look for the content in Portuguese, because I have more options in English, and this is just part of her life now. So I
Nice.
think, yes, her life has changed completely. So yes, that I'm
Oh.
very, very, very proud of her. Such a
I
good,
love that. Do you
yes.
see people how autonomy is something that's natural sometimes too? When the person really wants to do things, when a person really is that decided to learn, there's nobody that can stop a person from learning what they really want to learn. That's the reality. Because like if people wanted to, they wouldn't even need us to learn English. Right? That's the reality because most of you didn't have teachers either. So I think that's something beautiful to think about how a lot of you didn't have teachers and still you do speak English, or you had teachers later on in your lives when you were just like practicing conversation and stuff. So I think that's important to think about how, people, we can help blossom that new relationship with English, right? We can help them see how English is interesting and English is nice, how English can be a part of their lives. We have to incentivize that type of autonomy, that type of bilingual habit, that type of routine. But ultimately, people who want to, they do it. Right. And it's nice when we have students like that. It's kind of rare because we live in a society that doesn't make students be like that. Right. So I have had some cases where, like, oh my God, this student, it was even in the time where I still did study plans like maybe 3 years ago, and then the student started through the study plan, and then he started doing things on his own, and then said, no, you don't need to do the study plan anymore because I already got the hang of it. So that is beautiful. That's a scenario we want to work towards. And it's important when we make that clear in our content on social media too. We talk about autonomy and that sort of thing because then our students are looking at it. It's nudging them, but it's also attracting new students that already know about autonomy, that already care about autonomy. So that's a big tip I have. If you want more autonomous students, more involved students, then make content that is about being self-taught, that is about learning alone, that is about being autonomous, about metacognition. Do the research, and try to talk about that on social media because then those people that want freedom, that want autonomy, that want that help, they will be drawn to you. And that's the type of student we dream of having, isn't it? So we have the power to attract more students like that, right? To be honest, I don't care so much if my students are doing because I do my part, but I don't say that I'm only looking for students that are very involved. I've had teachers that are, but I really don't because I know that the level of students that I have normally where they're advanced, they really just want maintenance English, you know. So I don't have that criteria. Oh, you need to love English, but I think that especially if you're teaching basic students and intermediate students, that is very important, and I would market that a lot, like autonomy and self teaching to basic and intermediate students, right? So, my people, if any other questions come up, any other situations, any other stories, sad stories, happy stories, come up in the group, share it with us or with me in private. But it's a screenshot. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here with you and to have these conversations. Thank you so much. Let's take a screenshot. Amanda, Paula, where y'all at, girls? Is Paula not there today? No? Okay.
I'm here. Hold on, hold on. I'm sorry.
Wait a minute. Wait, she's gonna come. Wait a minute.
It's not working. I don't know why. Okay, you can take a screenshot. Sorry.
This okay. Thank you, my people. Mwah. See you next
Thank you so
week.
much. See
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Work
girls.
now.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.